Hate to say I told you so. Oh wait, no I don't. But what I told you last week at the end of the Iowa race review about what to expect in Toronto pretty much exactly came true. If we kind of look at Detroit, which is probably the most similar track to Toronto on the schedule in terms of the layout, in terms of how the races usually go, I think you got to look at Scott Dixon. I suspect he's going to save a lot of fuel. He's going to run third or fourth at the start of the race, and come the end, he'll be out front and pulling away. Now, yes, I'm fully aware that picking Scott Dixon, particularly in this season, is not much of a hot take, but the fact that, again, he has just shown such dominance throughout this season has really been quite remarkable. Again, seeing as everybody was predicting, oh, this will be the closest competition ever. Oh, the Universal Aero Kit will bring the field so close together. It really hasn't done that. It's kind of had the opposite effect, in which, again, I've kind of mentioned this before, kind of the top talent has kind of risen to the top, and a lot of the people who, as the drivers have said, the downforce kind of masked either their driving ability or their car setup. We haven't really seen a whole lot of them throughout this year. There haven't been a whole lot of surprise winners, and the surprises have kind of come from the drivers like Robert Wickens, who, have been highly touted, but there hasn't been a whole lot seen from them, at least on the IndyCar side of things. So again, Scott Dixon, absolute legend. Again, he's just elevating himself. I think he's now 8 wins off of Mario Andretti. These are numbers that we never thought we would end up seeing, much less from a modern era driver ever again. So, yeah, I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse talking about Scott Dixon right off the bat, but I just kind of felt to pat myself on the back just a little bit for predicting kind of almost exactly what would happen in this race. It played out almost exactly like the Detroit race, which I was kind of surprised that it did, but it seems like now this is kind of what we have to expect for the street courses and possibly the road courses from here on out. It seems like Joseph Newgarden, Ryan Hunter-Reay, and Scott Dixon, as well as maybe some spoilers with Will Power and Robert Wickens, are kind of the guys that are going to run up front. And then you kind of got the mid-packers like the Satos and the Marcos and the Hinchcliffes kind of filling out that top 10. It kind of seems like that's the way it's going to go. So, yeah, heading into Mid-Ohio as well, that's going to be a bit of an interesting aspect to all this because, again, that's a track that really favors Scott Dixon. So let's talk about the race itself because the drivers pretty much had no chill throughout this entire race, and it started out right at the beginning of the race. It looked like a freaking Cleveland start. If you remember back in the Cleveland airport days when they could fan out 10 wide, they didn't quite get 10 wide, but they got 5 wide for just a brief second. Will Power absolutely stuffed it up the inside of Simon Pagenaud. A similar move to what Helio Castroneves did last year in the Toronto race. Fabulous start. Really good racing throughout the field, especially on those first couple of laps. This is kind of what we've seen. I think the Universal Aero Kit shines on the street circuits. It's really created very good racing on the street circuits. It's maybe hurt the ovals a little bit, or especially the super speedway racing, but it has definitely improved the show on the street circuits, and we really saw that early on. Lots of slicing and dicing throughout the field. But it wasn't all sunshines and rainbows because we had the alternate strategies start to play into it just a little bit. We didn't see too many cars start on the black sidewall tires. We didn't really see a whole lot of difference between the reds and the blacks, or at least everybody was on the same strategy more or less, so that it really didn't play up very much. But Ed Jones stalled in the pits, and this was kind of the first instance we saw of this as Joseph Newgarden was leading the race and actually looked like he was going to dominate it, at least at the start. Then again, we had Scott Dixon sitting in second and fuel mileage and Scott Dixon. But we had Ed Jones stalled in the pits going off of a black sidewall start strategy going on to reds. Didn't matter anyway because he stalled the car. But what happened was he actually held up Joseph Newgarden a significant amount and allowed Scott Dixon to really close the gap, to the point that Paul Tracy decided to put his tinfoil hat on and make a conspiracy theory that would have had a great place on the IndyCar Red Pill. Paul, come on the show sometime. It didn't actually cost Newgarden the lead, but it definitely cost him a lot of time. And then we had kind of the first couple of instances of cars hitting what I guess we're going to now call the Wall of Champions 2, the final corner wall out of Toronto, or the final corner out of the Toronto circuit, which of course was reconfigured a couple years ago when I think Toronto was either hosting like the Expo or the Olympics or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was. But Will Power, you made contact with the wall, broke his car, and then the entire implosion of the Andretti team happened as Ryan Hunter-Reay, who was running third at the time, stuffed it in the barriers down in turn number 3, and then at the exact same moment, Alexander Rossi caught up with the broken car of Will Power and ran over the back of him, destroying his front wing. So that brought out the full course yellow because they had to go recover Ryan Hunter-Reay. And then we had the restart. And the restart, which pretty much defined the entire rest of the race. So on the restart, it looked like Joseph Newgarden was getting an incredible restart. He had a huge gap on Scott Dixon. But then, and I jumped out of my seat when I saw this because you usually don't see stuff like this, Joseph Newgarden pushed out into the gray, smacked the outside wall, somehow didn't damage the car, but he lost the lead, and in the ensuing stack-up, it allowed Robert Wickens and Simon Pagenaud to move up into the second and third position, respectively, and then we had the big one. And that was when Graham Rahal ran into the back of Max Chilton. Now, what was blamed for a lot of this chaos on the restart was the tire pickup. And that was part of the reason why I think Graham couldn't break into turn 1. But as he turned in, once he got off of Max Chilton, as Chilton slid into the wall, somebody caught Rahal from behind, and they all piled up behind him, and one car got airborne. And Alexander Rossi got up in the air. Ryan Hunter-Reay was also involved, so Rossi and Hunter-Reay were involved after being involved in just the previous yellow. And I can tell you, as someone who has now participated and actually competed in racing, oh my God, did I feel terrible for Michael Andretti seeing him have to replace 4 sets of front wings in about 5 minutes. Oh my God. Just looking at that and thinking, that's $120,000 worth of carbon fiber. I feel bad for you, Michael. I understand you're complaining about the old aero kits now. I get it. I get it. I still don't agree, but I get it because, man. But yeah, that was the big crash, and we've seen a lot of crashes like that at Toronto in the past. We didn't really see a whole lot of that style of accident in the aero kit era, but it certainly reminded me of the pre-aero kit DW12 era where they had the double file restarts on the street circuits, and more often than not we saw big pileups like that. And then we finally got to the next restart where it looked like it was completely Scott Dixon's race at this point. I mean, he just gapped the field, and it looked like he was going to just run away to a huge win. Like, I mean, he had probably 5 or 6 seconds on the field at that point, and he really didn't have any trouble in kind of that second of the third stints of the race. But during the pit stops, there was a little bit of an issue on the front. I think it was the front left tire, and it didn't really cost him anything. But kind of the key to that second round of pit stops was the fact that Simon Pagenaud's DXC technology crew for Penske got him out of the pits ahead of Robert Wickens. Wickens had been running second at the time, but the Penske Perfect pit crew, of course, kind of elevated Pagenaud. In fact, shout out to Pagenaud, his best run of the whole year so far. But then we got a little bit of controversy going on because Wiki Bobby decided to throw it down, tried to get to the inside in turn 1, ran into the back of Pagenaud. Pagenaud was none too pleased about it. Wickens decided to try it on the outside then, heading into turn 3, and Simon Pagenaud did the logical thing and shoved him right out next to the wall so that Robert Wickens could not pass. And then Robert Miller got confused when he interviewed Pagenaud later because Wickens said, "Are you kidding me?" on the radio, to which Townsend Bell responded, "You're darn right." For some reason, Robert Miller in the post-race interview thought that whole conversation had been between Simon Pagenaud and his engineer. I don't know, Robin, you got to pay a little more attention, buddy, because I don't know what you were listening to. But yeah, that was one of many controversy throughout the day. I'm actually going to talk about a few more once we get to the end of the race. But then we had, well, another controversy because, or not really a controversy, but just a little bit of drama, where we had Ryan Hunter-Reay, a lap down car, but obviously he had top 3 pace, was running in front of Scott Dixon and holding Dixon up to the point where it looked like Simon Pagenaud and maybe even Robert Wickens were going to close in and be able to fight for the win. And Dixon actually made a rare mistake, got up into the wall coming out of turn number 1. Thankfully for Dixon, he didn't damage the car at all. Maybe not thankfully for the folks who wanted to see anybody but Dixon win. And then eventually Ryan Hunter-Reay went into the pits, and that ended that. We saw a few more instances of wall contact as well coming out of that final corner. Both Takuma Sato and Spencer Pigot slammed the wall, ended their days. And then we talk about a few of the guys who had really good days coming down into the stretch. First of all, I guess I'll talk about Charlie Kimball because he put in Carlin Racing's most solid performance of the entire year. Really great drive, really. All things considered, he kept it off the wall. He kept it out of the other cars, kept it out of the tire barriers, kept it out of all the things that will end your day, and brought it home 5th. Just a solid drive from Charlie Kimball. And again, I know Kimball's got a lot of detractors, but we've seen this kind of solid drives from him before. Again, remember, he has a win, ironically, at the race that's coming up mid-Ohio, some dark horse there. But yeah, we've seen drives like this from Charlie Kimball before. It's just a lot of times they're few and far between. Speaking of another driver who kind of has few and far between results, and this one, unfortunately, has a sad ending. Marco Andretti, who was driving an absolutely fantastic race, had driven his way up from, I think, 9th or 10th on the grid, all the way up to 4th, and was a legitimate 4th in the race. And for whatever reason, they ran him out of fuel. The only driver to run out of fuel was Marco Andretti. The Andretti luck continues. I could not even believe it. I don't know what Marco has to do now. I mean, that's just... anything that can go wrong with Marco seems to go wrong, and as the commentators pretty much rightly pointed out, I know a lot of people were like questioning this, but if you think about it, Marco never really crashes all that much. He never really, outside of pace, really has a lot of unforced errors. He's a solid driver in terms of keeping the car in one piece. So it's a real shame that when he finally has a result, he earns a result, he doesn't get that result because the team runs him out of fuel. But those are the breaks in IndyCar racing. And speaking of breaks, it was Scott Dixon taking yet another victory. What else can you say? I mentioned it at the beginning. Dixon is the era's best driver. And it's really telling that Ganassi went from 4 to 2 cars this year. And the second car is performing less than the 10 car did last year. Ed Jones has, I would say, underperformed. I think that's fair to say at this point. It's a shame. I hope they will keep him on for next year, but there's always the possibility that a Brendan Hartley or a Felix Rosenquist could take that seat for next year. Maybe a Fernando Alonso. Stranger things have happened. Yeah, it's a shame that Jones has underperformed, but again, my ultimate point about this was that contracting from 4 cars to 2 has seemed to put all of the resources, at least in my opinion, or at least in what I've been able to kind of tell, all the resources have gone behind Dixon. Wise idea from Chip Ganassi, because as you've seen the development of this aero kit, you've seen the rise of Scott Dixon and Mike Hull. They've really figured this car out. They've figured out the aero. They've figured out how to drive it fast. They've figured out how to save fuel with the Honda engine. They've figured everything out. So I don't expect, again, I think I said this back in Detroit. If Dixon doesn't have this clinched before Sonoma, I think it's a disappointment at this point. Unless something drastic happens to him at Mid-Ohio, he'll probably win there. Pocono is another track that favors Scott Dixon. He ran strong there last year. It wasn't a race-winning performance, but There's no reason to think that he couldn't run up front at Pocono. Then we go to a place like Gateway, which may be a bit of a bugaboo, all things considered, for Scott Dixon. They have not had the short oval pace this year, and it really doesn't seem like the Honda is particularly, it has never really been a good car on the short oval tracks. So Gateway, maybe not. Maybe that's the place where a Newgarden, who obviously is very strong on oval tracks, very strong. He's strong at Pocono as well. Pocono may be the place where the championship really, we get an idea of what's going to happen in the championship, because of where Dixon and Newgarden end up finishing there. I think that's going to be really where we're going to find out where everything happens. But then again, Portland, that's a track that very few drivers now have experience at. I think we could probably name them on one hand. I think it's Will Power, Scott Dixon, Tony Kanaan, and three drivers. I think it's three drivers that have experience there right now. Simon Pagenaud? Yeah, Simon Pagenaud raced there. I'm trying to remember all the Champ Car guys. So four drivers have experience at Portland, and Dixon is one of them. And again, it's a road circuit. That seems to favor the Honda. It seems to favor Scott Dixon. And then, of course, Sonoma to finish out the season. Dixon has stolen a championship there before, and if he's got a big enough points lead with double points, all he's got to do is finish like third or fourth, and he's good. So I think I'm not going to crown him just yet, but get that crown ready to put on Scott Dixon's head. But yeah, Mid-Ohio up next. Now I'm definitely going to say that it's not calling any kind of a big shot to say, yeah, Dixon's probably gonna win there. But then again, we could have a surprise winner. Who knows? Shout out to Conor Daly. Solid street course racer, solid qualifying performance, solid race performance. He did a great job. Unfortunately, it was at the expense of Gabby Chavez, like I mentioned last week. But it's nice to see him back in the series. And again, he's kind of proving that he belongs. However, there was a little bit of controversy after the race on Instagram, of all places, which was a bit weird. Ed Jones and him had a bit of a war of words on the Snapchat. I mean, not Snapchat. Instagram thing, but again, that seems to be where drama happens, not necessarily in the pit lane. And there was a little bit of, supposedly there's controversy with Wickens and Pagenaud, and yet it always seems like Wickens downplays it when he gets out of the cockpit. He's like, no, I don't hate Alexander Rossi. No, we're cool. And then it's always like, oh no, it's just a racing deal. We'll reevaluate and see. He's very low key about it. He's definitely not low key in the cockpit, as we found out in that Iowa radioactive thing where he was like screaming F-bombs at the team, which, yeah, I like the passion. Just wish he'd showed a little more out of the cockpit. But then again, I think that's probably why people like Wickens, because he's the nice guy. So, yeah, Mid-Ohio in 2 weeks. The Indy Brickyard at the Battle at the Brickyard vlog is coming. It's taking me a little longer to put it together because it is kind of a large video to put together, lots of footage to edit. But that is coming. Don't worry. It's almost done. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts, disagree with me, all that good stuff. I love all of it. And we'll see you in the next video.